Welcome back. Today I'm sharing how to make this delicious matcha cake from scratch. Today we'll be using our whisk attachment on our stand mixer, or you can use a hand mixer. We're starting off by adding 2/3 of a cup of unsalted butter that's at room temperature into our bowl, along with 2 cups of granulated sugar. Once those are in our bowl, we're going to mix it at a high speed for 2 to 3 minutes to really help cream together our butter and sugar and incorporate a lot of air into the mixture. As you're doing this, you might want to stop partway through and scrape around the sides of your bowl just to make sure that everything is really getting mixed together properly. So once my butter had turned a lighter color, you can see here it's like a whitish color now, we're going to add in 2/3 of a cup of pasteurized egg whites. So I like to add these from a carton, but if you want to use fresh eggs, it's about the equivalent of 4 fresh egg whites. So now we're going to remove our whisk attachment and sift in our dry ingredients. So I like to do this straight into the bowl just to keep things simple. And we're adding 2½ cups of cake flour, along with 1 2/3 of a teaspoon baking powder, and of course, our star ingredient, a tablespoon of matcha powder. So you can see how gorgeous that color is, and it's going to naturally color our cake layers. The final dry ingredient that we're adding is a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So we're going to sift in about half of these dry ingredients, and then we're going to set this aside. I like to use my rubber spatula to start to fold the mixture together with our wet ingredients, just to help it come together a little bit more easily. And then I will use my whisk attachment to mix it further. But you want to mix just until those dry ingredients are incorporated. You don't want to overmix your batter. Next, we're adding in our remaining wet ingredients, which include a cup of full-fat sour cream, 1/8 of a cup of vegetable oil, and then 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. So we're again not mixing this on a super high speed. We're keeping this nice and low so we don't overwork the batter. And then our final step is to just sift in our remaining dry ingredients. Once our batter has come together, you can see it's a beautiful color, and we're going to bake it at 325 degrees for about 35 minutes. So while our cake layer is baked, I worked on our frosting for this cake, which is a faux Swiss meringue inspired by my friend Minette Rushing. So we're adding in a 1/2 cup of pasteurized egg whites and 3½ cups of powdered sugar. We're going to whisk this on a high speed until stiff peaks form, as you can see here. This takes about 5 to 10 minutes, so be patient. At this point in time, we're swapping out our whisk attachment for a paddle attachment, and we're going to start to slowly incorporate our unsalted butter. So to this, we're adding 1½ cups of unsalted butter. I added about half of it to start, and then I added in a tablespoon or 2 at a time until all of it was incorporated. I then added in my tablespoon of vanilla extract and 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and mixed this on a medium-low speed for about 5 minutes until my frosting was smooth and fluffy. To make it extra smooth and make sure there are no air bubbles trapped in there, I used my rubber spatula to pretty aggressively push my frosting back and forth in my bowl until I was happy with the consistency. So then I set my frosting aside, and once my cake layers were cooled, I used a serrated knife just to level off the tops. So you can see they didn't rise a ton, but it makes it so much easier to assemble a layer cake if your layers are nice and flat. Also, you get to snack on the cake tops and do a taste test before you assemble the cake, which is my favorite part. So once my cake layers are ready to go, I added a dab of frosting onto my grease-proof cake board just to keep my first cake layer in place, pressed it down and made sure it was centered, and then I began to spread an even layer of our faux Swiss meringue frosting onto this cake. You can see this frosting is really light and fluffy, and I was amazed by the texture as I was building this cake. I chose to use this frosting instead of my classic American buttercream because matcha isn't a flavor that's usually used in super sweet desserts, and a lot of people that like matcha don't like super sweet frosting. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to share a different type of frosting that's not quite as sweet for anybody who doesn't love American buttercream the same way that I do. This frosting really was a dream to work with. You can see how easily it just glides onto my cake layers, and I made sure to add a really thin layer of frosting here because this is just our crumb coat. So we just want to make sure that we're covering the entire cake to trap in any crumbs that might get into our second coat of frosting. Once I had covered the cake, I used my bench scraper to get my crumb coat nice and smooth, and then I leveled off that top bit with my small offset spatula. I chilled the cake in the freezer for about 15 minutes until the frosting was firm to the touch, and then I went to work on my second layer of frosting. So this recipe doesn't make a ton of buttercream, but this frosting goes a long way, so if you feel like you're about to run out of frosting, don't worry. This is the perfect amount for a 6-inch layer cake that is 3 cake layers. So as I was smoothing my frosting, I added a little bit of extra buttercream into any areas that I thought needed it. And then for my final pass around the cake, I actually ran my bench scraper under some really hot water and dried it off so that it's a little bit warm to the touch. And then I really slowly ran this around the sides of my cake. The heat from the bench scraper almost melts the frosting a little bit, which gives you this perfectly smooth, shiny exterior. So you can see I didn't remove a lot of frosting there, it just really helps smooth out that final coat. I then carefully smoothed the top of my cake, and then pop this back into the freezer as I made my white chocolate matcha ganache. I'm adding 1/3 cup of heavy cream into a microwave-safe bowl and heating it for about a minute in the microwave. This can vary based on how strong your microwave is, but you want to heat it just until it starts to bubble. I then added a cup of white chocolate chips into a separate bowl, and I'm pouring the warm cream over that. I'm going to make sure that all those chocolate chips are submerged under the warm cream, and I'm going to let that sit for 1 to 2 minutes to help the heat from the heavy cream melt the white chocolate. So after letting this sit, I'm starting to stir, and you can see the white chocolate melts pretty easily and pretty quickly. The mixture is quite thick, and it's kind of yellow in color just from the cocoa butter and the white chocolate. So now we're adding 1/2 teaspoon of matcha powder into this, which is going to give it a gorgeous color and a delicious flavor. So you really want to mix this well to make sure that there are no clumps of matcha powder in there. You want to make sure it's super smooth. And once you have this consistency and this look, it's time to add your first test drip onto your chilled buttercream cake. You can add drips to a cake using either a plastic squirt bottle or a spoon, and both work, but I've actually started using a spoon more often just because I think it gives you a little bit more control. So I like to take about a teaspoon or 2 of ganache on a spoon, add it to the top of the cake, and then gently push it over the edge to create each drip. So I added my first spoonful, and I was happy with the length of my drips. I know that they look kind of a little bit short now, but they will continue to run a little bit further down the cake as they cool. So don't worry if you think they're a little bit too short at first. However, if you have really stumpy short drips, you definitely want to heat your ganache up a tiny bit. And when I say heat up, you really only need 3 to 5 seconds in the microwave. It doesn't take much to change the consistency. Another thing to note is that you can see my drips look kind of thick at first, but over time they run into what I think makes a very cute drip. So if you have to err on the side of too thick or too thin, definitely try to make them a little bit thicker than you think they should be. On the other hand, if your drips seem too thin or are running too far down your cake, let your ganache cool a little bit and then try another test drip until you get the consistency just right. So there we have it, our matcha ganache drips are on our cake, and now it's time to just cover the top of our cake. To do this, I like to pour, I would say about 1/2 cup of ganache onto the cake right out of the bowl, and then just smooth it using my small offset spatula. To decorate the top of the cake, we're using an Ateco 869 frosting tip, and we're just adding some really pretty dollops around the top of the cake. If you don't have this frosting tip, you can totally use whatever your favorite tip is or whatever you have on hand. The finishing touch is just to dust those dollops with a bit of matcha powder. I like to get really aggressive with this so some of it kind of falls over the edge of the cake and onto the cake board. And just like that, our matcha cake is complete. If you guys want to recreate this cake at home, the recipe is up on Chelsweets.com, and I'll include the link in the video description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you guys again soon.